If someone had told me a year ago that the single greatest disruption to my meticulously ordered life would be the man who lived across the hall, I would have laughed. It would have been a dry, humorless sound. Because for the first 3 years we were neighbors, Julian was not a person to me. He was a noise, a collection of disturbances. He was the thud of heavy weights hitting the floor at 6 in the morning, a rhythmic booming that vibrated through my own floorboards and rattled the pens in my desk cup. He was the low, persistent bass of music I couldn't stand, leaking from under his door on a Tuesday night. He was the loud, booming laughter of strangers in the hallway, the clinking of bottles, the sound of a life lived at full volume while mine was muted, controlled, deliberately quiet. My life was a fortress of solitude I had built brick by careful brick. My apartment was its inner sanctum. I worked from home, a freelance graphic designer specializing in minimalist corporate branding. I thrived on clean lines, negative space, and unspoken rules. My routine was my religion. Coffee at 7, work from 7:30 to noon, a 30-minute lunch, always the same salad, work until 5, an hour of reading, a simple dinner, maybe a movie, bed by 10. Every day, a perfect, predictable loop. Julian was the chaotic, unpredictable variable that existed just on the other side of my door. I saw him, of course, in glimpses, a broad back covered in dark, technical fabric disappearing into his apartment, a flash of a confident smile directed at someone on his phone as he waited for the elevator. The sheer physical presence of him was overwhelming. He was tall, built like he was carved from denser material than the rest of us, with a jaw that looked like it could cut glass. He was, to my anxious and observational mind, an antagonist. The handsome, popular villain in a movie where I was the quiet, overlooked background character. He was everything I was not. Loud, gregarious, effortlessly physical. He moved with an unthinking certainty that I could only envy from a distance. My own movements were considered, careful, as if I were afraid of taking up too much space in the world. Julian seemed to want to take up all of it. Our interactions were a masterclass in brevity. A curt nod in the mailroom. A muttered, "Excuse me," as we passed in the narrow hall. My eyes were always fixed on the floor, on my keys, on anything but him. Looking at him felt like looking directly at the sun. It was too bright, too much, and I was sure it would burn. I built narratives about him in the quiet of my apartment. He was a trust fund kid, probably. A personal trainer to the rich and insufferable. Maybe an aspiring actor whose only talent was his looks. Each theory was a little barb, a way to shrink him down, to make his loud existence less of an intrusion on my quiet one. It was easier to resent him than to admit the truth. The truth was, his presence was a constant, humming reminder of a world I was not a part of. A world of easy laughter, casual touch, and a community that didn't require an invitation. The truth was, the thud of his weights sometimes sounded less like an annoyance and more like a heartbeat. A steady, powerful rhythm in the building's quiet moments. I hated that I noticed. I hated the small, traitorous part of my brain that cataloged the details. The way he carried his groceries in one trip, the muscles in his forearms bunching, the worn-out state of his running shoes left outside his door. The rare, unguarded moment I saw him through his window, just standing and looking out the city, his shoulders slumped, the confident mask gone. That last one was the most dangerous. It suggested a depth I didn't want to acknowledge. It made him a person, and I had no room for another person in my life. The fortress was designed for one. Then came the rain. It wasn't just rain, it was a deluge. A biblical, city-stopping torrent that had been lashing the windows for 2 days straight. The sky was a bruised purple-gray. The wind howled a low, mournful song around the corners of the building. It was the kind of weather that validated my lifestyle, a perfect excuse to lock the world out and sink into the comfortable hum of my own solitude. I was at my desk, finalizing a logo, the only sounds the click of my mouse and the storm outside. Then a new sound, a frantic, percussive banging. Not at my door, but his. I flinched, my concentration shattering. I heard his voice, a low curse, then the sound of his door being thrown open. Heavy, running footsteps in the hall. My first thought was annoyance. Another drama. Another disruption. But the footsteps were followed by shouting. Not angry shouting, but alarmed. I couldn't make out the words, just the panicked tone. Then a new sound began, a faint, persistent hissing that seemed to be coming from the wall we shared. I tried to ignore it. I put on my headphones, turned up my ambient focus track. But the anxiety was a physical thing, a prickling on my skin. This was a new noise, a wrong noise. Minutes later, a dark patch appeared on my ceiling. It started near the corner, a faint, gray stain against the white paint. I stared at it, my heart beginning a frantic, staccato rhythm against my ribs. The stain grew, darkening, and then a single drop of water broke free, hung suspended for a moment, and fell, hitting my hardwood floor with a soft, ominous tap. Talp! 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 Another drop, then another. A small, spreading puddle began to form. My fortress had been breached. Panic, cold and sharp, sliced through me. I grabbed a bowl from the kitchen, my hands shaking, and slid it under the drip. The sound changed from a soft tap to a hollow plink. It was somehow worse. Then a knock on my door. Not a normal knock. It was a hard, urgent fist. I froze. My protocol for unexpected knocks was simple. Ignore them. Wait for them to go away. Hello. Hey, Leo, right? Are you in there? Julian. His voice was muffled but clear. He knew my name. The thought sent a ridiculous, inappropriate jolt through me. How'd he know my name? I was sure I had never told him. Maybe he saw it on my mail. Of course. That was it. Leo, man, you've really got to open the door. It's an emergency. The word emergency overrode my carefully constructed defenses. I took a deep breath, unlocked the 3 locks, and pulled the door open just a crack, my body still half hidden behind it. He was standing there, drenched. Not from the rain. His shirt was soaked through, clinging to his chest. His hair was plastered to his forehead. His face was pale under his tan. And his eyes, I'd never been this close to see them properly before, were a startling, worried gray. There's a problem, he said, breathing hard. A pipe burst in the wall above my kitchen. It's bad. The super isn't answering. I think it might be affecting your place too. I just stared at him, at the water dripping from the hem of his shirt onto the hallway carpet. You're leaking, I said. It was the stupidest, most obvious thing I could have said. He gave a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. Yeah, my apartment too. A lot. Can I see if it's coming through your ceiling? I hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. His face fell, just a little. The confident mask slipped, replaced by something raw and tired and desperate. It was the same look I'd seen through the window. Right. Sorry to bother you, he started to say, turning away. No, wait, I heard myself say. The words felt foreign in my own mouth. Come in. I opened the door wider. He stepped inside, and my small, ordered world was immediately thrown off its axis. He filled the space. His sheer size, the smell of damp clothes, and something else, something clean and masculine like soap and faint spice. It was all an invasion of the senses. He looked at the bowl on the floor, the steadily dripping ceiling. Ah, hell, he muttered, running a hand through his wet hair. I am so sorry. The next few hours were a blur of chaos. Julian finally got a hold of the emergency building manager. Men in overalls arrived, stomping through both our apartments with loud tools and louder voices. They shut off the water to the entire floor. They tore a massive, gaping hole in Julian's kitchen wall, and a smaller, but no less horrifying, one in my ceiling. The verdict was grim. A main water line had corroded and burst. The damage was extensive. Repairs would take, at minimum, a week. His apartment was unlivable. Water was everywhere. His floors were warped, his furniture soaked. Mine was damaged but habitable, as long as I didn't mind a giant hole and the occasional phantom drip. I watched from my doorway as Julian stood amid the wreckage of his home. He wasn't the loud, arrogant neighbor anymore. He was just a man, standing in soaked socks on a ruined floor, looking utterly lost. He had a duffel bag at his feet, hastily packed with a few essentials. Guess I'm heading to a hotel, he said to one of the workers, his voice flat. And then, for the second time that day, my mouth moved without my brain's permission. You can stay here. The words hung in the air between us, fragile and terrifying. The workers had gone, leaving a profound, dripping silence behind. Julian turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears. I wanted to snatch the words back, swallow them, pretend they never happened. My fortress. My solitude. What was I doing? What? He asked, his voice low. The couch, I stammered, pointing a shaky finger into my living room. It's a pull-out. It's not great, but it's better than a hotel. And since it's, kind of your pipe that's dripping on my floor. I tried for a joke. It landed with a thud. He was silent for a long time, just looking at me. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. He was seeing me, really seeing me, and I was seeing him, stripped of the bass-thumping music and the loud friends. Just a man with a duffel bag and nowhere to go. You don't have to do that, he said finally. I know, I said, my voice barely a whisper. But the offer's there. He looked around my apartment, and my obsessively neat bookshelves, my minimalist art, the sterile quiet of it all. He looked back at the chaos of his own place. He let out a long, slow breath that seemed to carry the weight of the entire day with it. Okay, he said. Thank you. And just like that, the antagonist was inside the fortress. The first night was an exercise in hyper-awareness. Every sound was amplified. The creak of the floorboards as he moved around the living room. The soft zip of his duffel bag. The rush of water in the bathroom sink. I sat on my bed, my bedroom door firmly closed, and listened to the rhythm of this stranger in my home. It was a violation of every rule I lived by. My home was no longer silent. It was filled with his presence. I could hear his breathing from the other room, a slow, steady sound that was somehow more intimate than any conversation. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I crept out of my room at my usual 7. He was already awake, sitting on the edge of the pulled-out sofa bed, staring at the floor. He was wearing a pair of gray sweatpants and nothing else. My eyes snagged for a half-second on the broad expanse of his back, the complex map of muscles shifting as he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I saw a long, thin scar running parallel to his spine, a pale white line against his tan skin. It was a detail I couldn't have imagined. It was too specific, too real. He must have heard me, because he looked up. His face was etched with exhaustion. The confidence was gone, replaced by a stark, unguarded weariness. Morning, he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. Sorry, am I in your way? No, I said, my voice too loud in the quiet apartment. Coffee? God, yes. Please, we navigated the small kitchen in a clumsy, silent dance. I was acutely aware of the lack of space, of how close we had to be to get past each other. He leaned against the counter, out of my way, but his presence was still a solid, warm thing that seemed to radiate heat. I focused on the familiar ritual of grinding the beans, measuring the water. Routine was my anchor in this sea of awkwardness. I watched him out of the corner of my eye. I noticed the way his brow furrowed in concentration as he scrolled through his phone, likely dealing with insurance agents and contractors. I noticed the calluses on his palms when he wrapped his hands around the mug I gave him. These are the hands that lifted the weights that shook my floor. They weren't arrogant hands. They were working hands. Later that day, he was on the phone, his voice tight with frustration. No, I understand that, but what am I supposed to do? The report says a week, minimum. Yes, I'll hold. He paced the length of my small living room, the phone pressed to his ear. He looked trapped, a big, powerful animal in a cage that was far too small. My cage. My neat, tidy, quiet cage. And for the first time, I felt a pang of something that wasn't annoyance or fear. It was empathy. He hung up with a sigh, slumping onto the couch. Trouble? I asked from my desk. He looked up, surprised I'd spoken. Insurance. There being insurance companies. He scrubbed a hand over his face. I need to send them a detailed list of the damaged property, with photos. My laptop is fried. It got the worst of the water. The power dynamic was shifting. The man who I had perceived as having his entire life together, was helpless. I, the quiet observer, had the solution. You can use mine, I said, gesturing to my sleek, silver laptop. His eyes widened slightly. Really? Are you sure? You're working, I can take a break, I said. It's fine. He moved from the couch to the chair next to my desk. The space between us shrank to inches. I could feel the warmth coming off his arm, could smell that same clean, spicy scent, now mixed with the faint, pleasant aroma of my coffee. My heart did a nervous flutter. I focused on pulling up a new document for him, my fingers suddenly clumsy on the keyboard. "Thanks, Leo. You're seriously a lifesaver," he said, his voice low and close to my ear. "It's nothing," I mumbled, pulling my chair back to give him more room. As he started typing, his arm brushed against mine. It was nothing, a flicker of contact, skin against skin for less than a second. But it felt like a brand. A sudden, sharp jolt of electricity that shot up my arm and exploded in my chest. My breath hitched. The air in my lungs turned to stone. I could feel the heat of his skin, a stark contrast to my own, which was suddenly cold and clammy. I pulled my arm away as if I'd been burnt. A sudden, jerky movement that was far too obvious. He stopped typing. He looked at me. His gray eyes were searching, questioning. "Sorry," he said. "Not a lot of space here. It's fine." I choked out, my voice tight. I stood up abruptly. "I'm going to get some water." I fled to the kitchen, my heart a frantic, trapped bird beating against the cage of my ribs. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles white. What was that? It was just a touch. An accident. People touched accidentally all the time. It meant nothing. But my body didn't think it was nothing. My body was humming with the phantom sensation of his skin against mine, a low, persistent vibration that I couldn't seem to shake. I had spent years avoiding this. Avoiding complication. Avoiding the messy, unpredictable nature of human connection. And now it was sitting at my desk, in my chair, using my laptop. The fortress walls were not just breached. They were crumbling. The second night was worse than the first. The awkwardness was now charged with a new, terrifying energy. The accidental touch in the kitchen had created a field of awareness between us. I was conscious of every movement he made, every inch of space that separated us. We ate dinner in near silence, the clinking of our forks against the plates a deafening symphony of unspoken tension. I retreated to my room early, pleading a headache. It wasn't a lie. My head was pounding with the force of my own overthinking. I lay in the dark, listening. I heard him cleaning up the kitchen, the soft splash of water, the quiet click of the cabinets. He was being a perfect guest, considerate, tidy. It was almost more unnerving than if he had been messy. It showed a thoughtfulness I hadn't been prepared for. Later, I heard the soft creak of the sofa bed. Then silence. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a silence filled with his presence, with the memory of that brief, electric touch. I wondered if he felt it too. Or was I just projecting my own, starved, longing onto an innocent gesture? The thought was humiliating. Of course it was just me. He was the confident, popular guy. He probably touched people all the time without a second thought. The storm outside had renewed its fury, the wind rattling my window pane. Sleep felt a million miles away. After what felt like hours, I gave up. My throat was dry. I decided to risk a trip to the kitchen for water. I opened my bedroom door as quietly as I could and padded into the hallway. The living room was dark, illuminated only by the intermittent flashes of lightning from outside. In one of those brilliant, momentary flashes, I saw him. He wasn't in bed. He was standing by the large window, a silhouette against the storm-tossed city skyline. He was just as I'd seen him before, from my own window. Still, watchful, and achingly lonely. He must have heard the floorboard creak. "Can't sleep either?" His voice came out of the darkness, quiet and rough. I jumped, my heart leaping into my throat. "No, you whispered." "I was just getting some water." "Me too," he said, though he made no move towards the kitchen. I hovered in the doorway, unsure whether to advance or retreat. The social script for this situation did not exist in my internal library. Another flash of lightning lit the room, and I saw his face. The exhaustion was still there, but it was mixed with something else, something vulnerable. This is really nice of you, Leo," he said into the darkness. "Letting me stay here. I know your space is important to you. How do you know that?" The question was out before I could stop it. I saw the faint outline of his smile in the gloom. "I'm not as oblivious as I look. You're always contained, quiet. Everything in its place. I figured you liked your privacy. I do, I admitted. So, thank you, he said again, his voice sincere, for letting me mess it all up. I found myself moving towards the window, drawn by a force I couldn't name. I stopped a few feet away from him. We stood in silence for a moment, two strangers in the dark, watching the storm. You know, he started, his voice barely audible over the rain. It's funny. My place is always full of people. Clients, business partners, friends of friends. It's always so loud, he paused. But it's the loneliest damn place in the world. The confession hung in the air, raw and unexpected. It dismantled the last of my preconceived notions about him. The loud parties, the booming music. It wasn't a life of effortless connection. It was a performance, a front. I thought you liked the parties, I said, my voice small. He let out a short, bitter laugh. I hate them. I'm a contractor. I build things. The parties are networking, schmoozing. It's part of the job. You have to project success to get success, you know? He turned his head to look at me, his eyes catching the distant city lights. I always figured you hated me for the noise. My stomach twisted. Hate is a strong word, but you were annoyed, he pressed gently. It's okay. I would be too sometimes, I admitted. I was always a little jealous of you. To be honest, he said, and the words were so shocking I thought I must have misheard him. Jealous? Of me? Yeah. You seemed so self-sufficient. You didn't seem to need anyone. You had your work, your quiet. It looked peaceful, like you knew exactly who you were and what you wanted. My whole life feels like I'm trying to be someone I'm not, just to keep the business afloat. My fortress. He saw my fortress not as a prison of anxiety, but as a kingdom of self-possession. The irony was a physical ache in my chest. He saw strength where I only felt fear. It's not peace, I heard myself say, the words tasting like rust. It's armor. He was silent, processing that. He took a step closer. The space between us became charged, electric. The air grew thick, heavy. I could feel the heat of his body, smell the storm on his skin. What are you hiding from, Leo? He asked, his voice a low murmur that vibrated through my bones. I couldn't answer. The words were trapped in my throat, a tangled knot of 1,000 lonely nights and a deep, abiding fear of being truly seen. He took another step. We were so close now. I could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. My entire world had shrunk to the space between our bodies. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a wild, panicked rhythm. He lifted a hand, slowly, as if not to spook a wild animal. He didn't touch me. He just hovered, his fingers inches from my cheek. It was a question, and in that moment, all the years of solitude, all the carefully constructed walls, they felt like a waste. A long, slow suicide of the soul. I was tired of the armor. I was tired of being safe. I closed the distance. My lips met his. It wasn't a frantic, passionate kiss like in the movies. It was hesitant, tentative, a soft, searching pressure. It was a question and an answer all at once. His lips were warm, surprisingly soft. For a moment, we just stayed there, a chaste, frozen connection. Then, I felt his hand cup the back of my neck, his fingers tangling gently in my hair, and he tilted his head, deepening the kiss just slightly. A soft, defeated sigh escaped my lips, and I melted into him. My hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart beneath my palms. It was a rhythm I knew, the same one that sometimes vibrated through my floorboards. But this was different. It wasn't a disturbance. It was an anchor. The world outside, with its howling wind and lashing rain, disappeared. The only thing that existed was the warmth of his mouth on mine, the solid presence of him in my arms, and the overwhelming, terrifying, beautiful feeling of my fortress walls turning to dust. I woke with a gasp. Sunlight, pale and watery, was streaming through my bedroom window. The storm had broken. The silence in the apartment was absolute, and I was alone. My heart seized in my chest, a cold, hard knot of panic. I sat bolt upright, my mind a frantic, chaotic mess. The events of the night before came rushing back in a dizzying, humiliating flood. The confession, the kiss, The way we had stood there for what felt like an eternity, just holding each other in the dark before I'd finally, wordlessly, retreated to my room. What had I done? I threw back the covers and crept out of my room. The living room was empty. The sofa bed was neatly folded back into a couch. The blankets I had given him were folded in a perfect, crisp square on the cushion. He was gone. The panic intensified, churning in my stomach like a nest of angry bees. He was gone. He had woken up, realized his mistake, and fled. Of course he had. I had thrown myself at him. I had misread everything, his vulnerability, his kindness, and twisted it into something it wasn't. He was just a guy in a bad spot, and I was the desperate, lonely neighbor who took advantage. The self-recrimination was a physical blow. I leaned against the doorframe, my head spinning. I felt sick. Then I saw it. A piece of paper on the kitchen counter, held down by a salt shaker. My legs felt like lead as I walked over to it. My hand trembled as I picked it up. The note was written in a surprisingly neat, strong script. Leo, went to check on the apartment and meet the adjuster. Didn't want to wake you. Thanks for last night. Julian, thanks for last night. The words were a brutal, ambiguous torture. Thanks for the couch? Thanks for the talk? Or a polite, dismissive, pitying thanks for the kiss you clearly regret? My mind, a master architect of worst-case scenarios, immediately chose the latter. It was a brush-off, a gentle, cowardly way of saying, let's pretend that didn't happen. I sank onto a kitchen chair, the note still clutched in my hand. The silence of the apartment, once my cherished companion, was now a suffocating presence. It was no longer the peaceful quiet of solitude. It was the roaring quiet of absence. Every empty space screamed his name. The couch where he slept, the spot by the window where we stood. The air still seemed to hold the faint scent of his soap. My fortress was a ruin, and I was alone in the wreckage. The entire day passed in a gray, anxious haze. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, unable to work. My mind was a relentless loop of the kiss, of the look in his eyes, followed by the cold, hard reality of the empty apartment and the polite, sterile note. I replayed every moment, searching for clues I might have missed. Had he flinched? Pulled away? No. He had kissed me back. He had held me. My hands went to my neck, remembering the feel of his fingers in my hair. It had felt real. It had felt honest. But the morning light changes everything. In the dark, secrets feel safe. In the day, they look like mistakes. Every creak in the hallway sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I kept expecting a knock on the door. Or worse, to see him in the hall, to have to face the awkward, pitying smile and the inevitable look about last night. Conversation. The thought was so mortifying I couldn't bear it. I became a prisoner in my own home, a state I was used to, but the reasons had changed. I wasn't keeping the world out. I was hiding from one specific person. By late afternoon, the silence had become a physical weight, pressing down on me, crushing the air from my lungs. The solitude I had once cultivated as a shield now felt like a punishment. I had been given a glimpse of something else, something warm and real, and now the contrast made my quiet life feel unbearably empty. Maybe it was better this way. A clean break. A stupid mistake made during a storm, now washed away by the morning sun. I could rebuild my walls. I could reinforce my routines. I could go back to being the quiet man in 4B, and he could go back to being the loud neighbor in 4A. We could return to our curt nods and averted eyes. The thought was devastating. As dusk began to settle, painting the city in shades of orange and purple, a profound sense of resignation washed over me. I had taken a risk, a wild, uncharacteristic leap, and I had fallen. It was time to accept it, to lick my wounds, and to retreat back into the safety of my shell. I was making myself a sad, solitary dinner when the knock came. It was a soft, hesitant knock, not the urgent fist from the day of the flood. My entire body went rigid. It could be anyone, a delivery, a neighbor with a package. But I knew. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate plea. Don't answer. Don't answer. Don't answer. The knock came again, a little more insistent this time. Now, it's Julian. Can we talk? His voice was low, strained. I closed my eyes, took a deep, shuddering breath. I could not do this. I could not face the pity, the awkward apology. But the thought of him walking away, of the silence returning, was somehow worse. I walked to the door on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. My hand shook as I turned the locks. I opened the door. He was standing there, looking just as wrecked as I felt. He wasn't wearing his confident mask. His shoulders were slumped. His hair was a mess, as if he'd been running his hands through it all day. His gray eyes were dark with an emotion I couldn't read. Anxiety? Regret? Hey, he said, his voice rough. I whispered back. We stood there for a beat, trapped in a thick, unbearable silence. Can I come in? He asked finally. I stepped back, holding the door open. He walked past me, and the apartment was once again filled with his presence. He didn't go far, just stood in the middle of the living room, turning to face me. He looked as out of place as he had the first day, but this time, the tension was 1,000 times worse. My apartment is still a disaster, he began, stuffing his hands into his pockets. They think maybe 5 more days. Oh, I said, my mind racing. Was this his way of asking to stay longer? After last night? The audacity, or to the cluelessness. That's not why I'm here, he said quickly, as if reading my thoughts. He took a breath. I'm here because I was an idiot this morning. I stared at him, my confusion warring with my fear. I woke up, he continued, his eyes fixed on the floor, and you were asleep. And I panicked. I just freaked out. You freaked out. I repeated, my voice flat. The confirmation was a cold stone in my stomach. Yes, he said, finally looking up at me. His eyes were pleading, but not for the reason you think. I didn't freak out because I regretted it. I freaked out because the world tilted slightly on its axis. I don't understand, I said. He took a step closer. Leo, last night, it felt more real than anything that's happened to me in years. All this, he gestured vaguely around him, my life, the parties, the endless networking, it's all noise. It's a show. I build beautiful houses for other people, and I go home to an empty apartment that I fill with strangers, so I don't have to hear myself think. He took another step. And then I came in here, into your quiet, and it wasn't empty. It was calm. And last night, with you, that was the first time I felt calm in a long, long time. My throat was tight. I couldn't speak. So when I woke up this morning, he went on, his voice dropping lower, and it was real. In the daylight, it terrified me. Because things that are real can be broken. Things that are real can be lost. And I'm an expert at breaking things. So I did what I always do. I ran. I left a stupid note, and I ran. He was standing in front of me now, so close I could see the pulse beating in his throat. I spent the whole day walking around the city, trying to get my head straight, trying to convince myself it was a mistake, a fluke, a thing that happened in a storm. But it wasn't. And I was an asshole for leaving like that, for making you think, for making you feel. He trailed off, shaking his head. I'm sorry, Leo. I'm so sorry. The confession was a key, turning a lock deep inside me. The fear, the anxiety, the humiliation that had been strangling me all day. It began to recede, replaced by a fragile, tentative shoot of hope. I thought you regretted it. I whispered, the words raw and honest. I thought I was a mistake. No, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out, his hand hovering in the air between us, just as it had the night before. A question. You were the furthest thing from a mistake this time. I didn't hesitate. I met him halfway, my hand finding his. His fingers laced through mine, his grip firm, warm, and sure. It wasn't a jolt of electricity this time. It was a current of pure, unadulterated relief. This is new territory for me, I admitted, my voice shaking slightly. I'm not. I don't do this. Me neither, he said, a small, wry smile touching his lips. Not this. Not real. He squeezed my hand. So maybe we can be scared together? I looked at our joined hands, then up at his face. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface. But for the first time, it was eclipsed by something else. Something bigger and brighter and infinitely more powerful. Okay, I said, and the word felt like a promise. Scared together, he stayed. His apartment was still a wreck, a convenient and unspoken excuse. But we both knew he wasn't there because he had nowhere else to go. He was there because he wanted to be. He asked, that night, his voice hesitant, if he could stay a few more nights. But the question was different. He didn't look at the couch. He looked at me. And later, when we lay in my bed, the darkness was not a place for secrets, but a sanctuary. There was no storm outside, only the quiet hum of the city. His arm was a warm, heavy weight around my waist, his breathing a slow, steady rhythm against my back. It was the most profound peace I had ever known. My fortress had not been destroyed. It had simply opened its gates. The days that followed were a quiet revelation. A new routine began to form, one that was not rigid and solitary, but fluid and shared. It was in the small things. It was in the mornings, making coffee together in the small kitchen, our bodies moving in a new, familiar dance. Our hands would brush, and there would be no panic, only a soft, pleasant spark. He started buying a specific type of dark roast he learned I liked, leaving a new bag on the counter as a silent offering. It was in the afternoons. I would be working at my desk, lost in the clean lines of a design, and I would look up to see him on the couch, not on his phone, not pacing but reading a book, his brow furrowed in concentration. The quiet of my apartment was no longer empty. It was a shared silence, comfortable and deep. He was a steady, calming presence in my space, a silent anchor that kept my anxious mind from drifting. It was in the evenings. We would make dinner together, or he would order in from a place he loved, eager to share it with me. We would talk. We learned the topography of each other's lives. I learned about his childhood in a small town, his difficult relationship with his father, his passion for building things that last. He learned about my quiet upbringing, my love for art, the anxieties that had led me to build such a solitary life. He never pushed. He never demanded more than I was willing to give. He seemed to understand, intuitively, the parts of me that were still fragile, still learning to trust this new, unexpected happiness. He saw the armor, and instead of trying to tear it down, he simply waited for me to set it aside. One night, I was sketching in my notebook while he read on the couch. He looked over at me, a soft smile on his face. "What are you drawing?" he asked. "Nothing," I said, my instinct to hide my work still strong. "Let me see," he said gently. He came over and sat on the floor beside my chair. I hesitated, then turned the notebook towards him. It was a sketch of his hands, calloused and strong, resting on the cover of his book. He was quiet for a long time, just looking at it. "You see things," he said finally, his voice soft. "The things other people don't notice." He looked up at me, his gray eyes full of a wonder that made my heart ache. "You see me." He leaned in and kissed me, a slow, gentle kiss that tasted of gratitude and a deep, quiet understanding. In that moment, I knew this was real. This was something that could last. When the day came that his apartment was finally ready, a strange, quiet dread filled me. We stood at his door, looking in at the freshly painted walls and new flooring. It was clean, empty, and sterile. It was his home, but it no longer felt like it. "Well," he said, breaking the silence. "Guess I should move my stuff back, yeah," I said, my voice hollow. He turned to me, a serious expression on his face. "I don't want to," he said simply. My breath caught. "I like our routine," he continued, a faint blush creeping up his neck. "I like your coffee. I like watching you draw. I like waking up next to you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his keys. He slid the key to his apartment, off the ring. "I think I'm going to give this back to the landlord." He held out his other hand, palm up. "The only key I want," he said, his voice dropping to a low, earnest whisper, "is a key to this side of the hall, my carefully ordered world, the one I had guarded so fiercely for so long, had been completely and irrevocably rearranged. The man I had once considered a disturbance, a collection of noises from across the hall, had become the very heartbeat of my life. He was the plot twist I never saw coming, the beautiful, chaotic disruption that had saved me from my own quiet, comfortable prison. I didn't come to this building looking for love. I came here looking for a quiet place to hide. But love, it turned out, had its own plans. It burst through the walls, a relentless, unexpected flood. And instead of drowning me, it washed everything clean, leaving behind something stronger, something truer, something built to last. It left behind us